is the theme to the show. This show is all about you. Not you, but you and your stories. Because everybody has a story with Jeff Seltzer. Everybody has a story with Jeff Seltzer. Brought to you by JeffSeltzer.com.
Hello and welcome to Everybody Has a Story with Jeff Seltzer. I am your host, Jeff Seltzer, and as always, I'm excited to be here. Why am I excited to be here? Well, it's another week, it's another podcast, and this is something I like to do, so why not be excited to do what I am doing. Wanted to start off the show by talking about a guest that I had a few weeks ago on the show, Jamie Romano. So the episode I had with her, I talked about how I'm an introvert. I'm probably stuck at being an introvert. I'm probably the world's worst introvert again. I have my own podcast. I do dumb things, I get attention, and unfortunately, I start conversations I probably don't want to have. Funny thing is, so somebody actually sent her a text, somebody in her family, with the review of the show, basically saying, hey, I just finished watching the show, the whole podcast. You did great. That guy, Jeff Seltzer, your friend, just from hearing him speak, does not sound like an introvert whatsoever. He is not at a loss for words. The both of you were amazing. I'm glad I got to listen to it. So first of all, to Jamie's family member, thank you so much for sending that in. I really appreciate it. Any kind of feedback, words of wisdom I can get is awesome. What I will say is that I've had this debate multiple times with myself, with my wife, and just anybody who will listen to me. I do feel like I'm an introvert in the fact that generally extroverts get energy from people around them and outside of them. As an example, I'll go to sales meetings or whatever else like that, and I am just drained the second I get there. Like I don't feel like I get energy from other people. I feel they're stealing my energy, and it just doesn't really work the way it's supposed to. Additionally, it was funny because as I got that text from Jamie, I was legitimately fetaled up in bed at night trying to go to sleep because I was in the office all day and I was exhausted. So, I mean, there are people that I work with who love going to the office and are excited and they thrive on it. For me, I'm more of a lock myself in my house perspective and I get work done that way. So I don't know. I mean, I guess we're all wired differently, and maybe one day I'll figure out, am I an introvert, an extrovert? Am I a hybrid? I mean, I guess I'm a bit of a hybrid in the fact that I adapt or adjust as needed. So we'll see. I did want to mention once again, as always, that the show can be found on Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. The TikTok for the show is also at Everybody Has a Story Pod. My personal Instagram is at Seltzer77. For all things Jeff Seltzer, you can go check me out at JeffSeltzer.com. Please reach out to the show directly via email at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. And just a reminder, as always, we are available on all podcast platforms. With that said, I did want to welcome to the show this week my guest, Danny Gardner. Danny, how are you today?
What's up, Jeff? It's awesome to be here, man. I know we've probably talked about this for a while, and I think it's amazing what you've built. I mean, everybody has a story. I couldn't think of a more kind of universal application because everyone really does, and it's so fun. Just in my own kind of world as a content creator, I often also talk about like how I have a story and it's unique, but everyone else around me that I meet also has a story. So I think the premise is awesome, man. It's great to be here.
Cool. I appreciate that. And to your point, it's funny too, because like even people that I talk to, I'm like, hey, can I get you on the podcast? Like, I'd love to hear about your story. And people are like, I'm not interesting. I don't have a story or whatever. But then 30 seconds talking into them, I'm like, yes, that's your story. We all have some kind of, whether it be like an origin story or a villain story or something that kind of like explains like how we are, what we are today, or what we enjoy, or those around us. So with that said, before getting too deep into it, Danny, I did want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and tell our listeners who you are.
Yeah. So it's great to be here. I work with Jeff, but I'm a career social listener. I do this for a living. I'm pretty much a guy that analyzes what people say online. However you define social media, which is kind of the larger kind of big picture question that I try to answer every day in my job. I've been doing this pretty much my entire time, but I actually don't come from this background. I'm a trained economist. That's a very below average one. But I pivoted kind of into the marketing, big data world. It was just more kind of intellectually stimulating, I think, for me. I fell into it completely by accident. I've gone on to meet many marketers who studied economics, much like myself. So there's some transferable skills there. That's what I do. I'm a content creator. I'm a digital analyst. I'm a marketer. I'm a researcher. I'm kind of a little bit of everything. But one of the things that I've kind of found a deeper passion in is really kind of around personal branding. It's kind of a niche within my own niche that a lot of people, I think, kind of look to me to, or that I'd love to like learn about when I meet other people. we're in a new world where everything around your digital footprint kind of matters, and it's just like you're investing, right? It's something I talk to with a lot of my friends is that you do a little bit of it at a time over many years, right? It's time is your greatest asset. Same thing with your 401k or your Roth IRA or the other kind of investments that many people have. Um, digital is the new currency, and I
Absolutely.
think it's a very powerful kind of vehicle. So anyway, that's what I've kind of used my career to kind of build something on the side around. And I think Jeff, that as someone who's also done that, I think you and I kind of share a lot of the same appreciation for the grind, and really just at the end of the day, the passion, the fun. That's what drives me every day. I think that's very much what drives you too.
Nice. Well, first of all, Danny, again, thank you for joining and thank you for sharing all of that. So, weird thing in common, I also have an economics background. I was a double major of econ and political science, both of which I don't really use either of in my real world life at this point. It's kind of one of those deals where I guess, I mean, in college, I was working at a CVS, got my degree, and then kind of fell into a job. I was working at IRI for a bunch of years and kind of like bounced from job to job. So for me, it was a case of I got my degree, got my foot in the door, and kind of learned everything else along the way. So as you said, there's a lot of, we have a lot of things in common in terms of like, personal branding, social media and things like that. What I will say is obviously I'm a few years older than you are. So you probably, and I'm going to make a guess on age here, grew up with some social media versus social media wasn't a thing until I was well into my probably 20s or 30s. So without guessing or going too deep into your age, unless you want to share it, like what's your earliest social media or, memory, I guess, or kind of like how did you first like get into it or start like working with it or connecting via it?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I just turned 30.
Okay.
So I'm kind of a zillennial. I'm like right on the edge of like the earliest. I'm technically a millennial. I'm like the youngest of the millennials. So I do know what it was like to grow up, scraping my knee and riding a bike and playing on a jungle gym. But also, with some of the, early technology around, Game Boy and kind of the whatever that I think about this all the time. Play Now, right? I think
Yeah.
that's what they were called, like the discs or whatever.
Yeah.
And portable DVD players. Like that was still very early on in its time. My first exposure to social media was, I think, probably I want to say it was probably MySpace. I never actually had a MySpace till like later on, but I remember right around, I want to say when I was in fourth grade. So this is I don't know, this is maybe like 2004, 2005. Was really just the first kind of iteration of social media right after the dot-com boom.
Yep.
Was really kind of a pioneer in the space. Basically, you could design your own page, you could have trending audio, friends list. There's all these kind of cool things. And as a kid, you didn't really know or appreciate that. There wasn't a whole lot of literature around, the dangers of kind of online behavior and activity, and some other things that are a little more prominent today. But I remember it vividly because I wasn't allowed to have one,
Okay.
and this was just kind of a parental thing. Like my parents, I don't think knew any better, and my dad's in tech. My mom kind of came from corporate America, went on to become an entrepreneur herself. So my parents were well educated and had some idea of what this was. But I remember the very earliest days of YouTube, back when there were no ads. I remember what the app looked like on the first, like it just it's. So I remember when YouTube, it can only be up to 10-minute videos.
Yep.
There was no ads. It was a very old interface. If you go look it up on Google, which I like to do sometimes just to remind myself of how long ago this was. So YouTube, I wasn't one of the first people to Facebook. As a matter of fact, I was probably one of the last people in my class to Facebook. I want to say like 2007, 2008. And Facebook also a pioneer and still very relevant today. It's the largest social media. Um, but it was just entirely different. Social media was more about connecting with the people you knew. And now, over many decades, it's really a paradigm shift in how we engage with each other online, because now we engage with complete strangers. And it's just a weird phenomena that, like, the origin of what Facebook and Instagram, which Meta later bought, that's what it started as, was like a weird, goofy, kind of cringe way to interact with each other. We didn't really know how to use it, but
Yeah.
it's a lot of fun to kind of look back on. That was really my first exposure, just as a consumer,
Right.
and as a teenager to this, but really kind of in its infancy versus what I think today's kids experience with the much more established field of Be Real, Snapchat, TikTok. So it's just, I mean, I don't envy parents today. I think it's very difficult to kind of navigate through this, but as an adult and as a professional gets to do this, I think
Yep.
it's kind of fun. So it's cool to kind of reflect on where we've been versus where we are now.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So for me, so you said you turned 30, you're about 30. So I'm 47. So I didn't grow so
So young.
I grew up way before dot coms and I grew up way before all this stuff. Like I remember I think it was like 1994 I got like my first computer that you can plug into like, the internet of sorts, right, with the
Yeah.
telephone connection. And I remember we got AOL. And I'm not sure how it was when you first got your first email address, but back then like email addresses were like crazy in terms of people weren't thinking like, hey, in 20 years I'm going to apply for a job with this as my email address, and who cares what the recruiter or whatever sees it as. So I was actually fairly tame, all things considered. So I was a basketball fan in high school. So in the 90s, I was a basketball fan. And the Boston Celtics had just drafted Eric Montross,
Hmm.
number 0, from I think it was from North Carolina or Duke, one of those two schools he came from. And I remember at the time I set up an AOL account and said, "What's your email address, or what do you want to set it up for?" And I was like, I don't know, Montross at AOL.com or Montross0 or something like that, whatever. And I got it. So I do remember like early times, like 94, 95, 96, going onto AOL. And there were a few people who were like, "Are you really Eric Montross?" Like things like that were just dumb, right? Like nowadays, like
Yeah.
people wouldn't do like, I wouldn't do like, oh yeah, Dylan Harper at gmail.com because, he's a basketball player for Rutgers, soon to be in the
Sure.
NBA.
Yeah.
Like that wouldn't happen. But back then, and that was tame compared to a lot of the other addresses and names that you would
Oh yeah.
see. And then even weirdly enough, like then I went to Rutgers a couple years later. Same thing. I was like, well, my email address was Montross at AOL. Let's do Montross at eden.rutgers.edu. So it was a case of like, throughout my college career, I still had like a random email address, right? So it was one of those things where I don't know what it really said about me. I think it was more a matter of like, there weren't really rules back then. I mean, there aren't rules now, but like back then there was even less rules. It was very
Oh
much
yeah.
the Wild West. And then, the internet for me, I know it wasn't really a big thing until like probably late college or early 2000s, I guess, when I was working, versus nowadays, I guess being born in 95, you basically grew up with the internet. So like the concept of a library and like going there for research was probably non-existent, versus me in 1995 in college. I was trying to find things through encyclopedias. I was trying to find whatever research I could for stuff. It's a completely different world. Like I always joke that like
Yeah.
I'm a Gen Xer, but like I'm also a hybrid of a millennial of sorts, because for me, like I like technology, I like the online stuff, and like I really feel like I was probably born somewhere between 10 and 30 years too early. But I mean, this is the life that I was given, I guess, right? Is how it
Yeah.
goes.
It's fascinating to hear you reflect on it too, and folks that are and even a little older than you, folks that I've kind of met. And I tell my parents this too, who were kind of in their teens and early 20s in the 80s. I think one of the greatest decades. I think that's I don't think it's really debated, and the more I've learned about the 80s and especially the music and just the culture, and it was a different time, and I think like there was more humanity in the 80s arguably than there is today. I remember I've talked about this with, I forget, probably my parents' friends, was that a couple of them feel that like in the 90s society almost started to regress. Like technology got to a point where, yeah, it created some efficiencies, but it actually made us less human in a way, right? Is like if you look at today's modern dating scene, right, or you look at right how people learn in school, right? There's a lot of things that are just significantly worse, I think, than what society kind of functioned as or believed in the 80s, 90s, or even before that. So it's interesting to kind of reflect on it, because I think there's so much that's happened that's improved society, right? Much like the introduction of the car or the printing press, right, or the television or the radio, right,
Sure.
which happened in the last hundred plus years. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, I think I was cracking up as you're mentioning dial up. I remember that was kind of like my first. I never had an AOL, but my parents did, my grandparents did, and like I remember like that was a thing, and like even I think when I was old enough to ask my parents what that was, I didn't fully understand it, but just like the way we communicated with people was so different. I was also laughing at your reference to like libraries and stuff like that. I remember I had like immediate PTSD. I want to say like kindergarten or first grade, we did I don't know, you did like research reports or stuff. I remember writing like bibliographies on note cards.
Right.
I remember following, like, it's like seared into my head.
Yeah.
Not too much, because I couldn't replicate it again.
Sure.
But it was like like the sequence that you write and cite sources. And I'm like, this is actually a much bigger thing today in the world of AI and information, how it spreads, is like citations. And I'm like, I used to write this on a note card. I'm like, this was like, we used to do it this whole way. And then I remember getting to college and like citing stuff. And like, I forget the tool, but like you basically put in your sources, it would create it for you. I'm like, where was this?
Right.
In 2002.
To
But,
that
and
point,
now,
let me ask you this. So growing up, obviously, a few years after I did, um, I don't know the last time I've heard the term the Dewey Decimal System. Does that mean anything to you at all, or not really?
I know the term. I couldn't tell you, I think, what it is. It's kind of like, I was just joking with, I was with my mom the other day. I
Sure.
forget where we were. Or we had to sign a check or something, or she signed a check.
Oh no.
I don't know why I'm blanking on what this was, but I remember we were talking to one of the cashiers, or I kind of forget who we were talking to. Um, but we were talking about how, like, cursive is a dying thing, and I'm
Sure.
like, someone said something about like my signature. I don't know. My mom was cracking a joke at me because I don't have great handwriting,
Right.
but I said something like, "Well, you don't even really need to have good handwriting today because everything is text based, or, and this is a new technology, but voice transcription
Right.
is getting better and better." And so I'm like, cursive doesn't really mean anything. But I remember, like, I took cursive, and I don't think they teach that anymore. But it's like, it's such an important thing. I'm like, the most important things you sign, right, is usually some form of document or contract or whatever,
Sure.
right? You're signing with your hand, and like that meant something. Like, I remember when I signed, my first car, right, or more recently my home,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So I'm like that means something. But script, or cursive is just a thing. It's kind of dying, much like I think the bibliography and like researching in libraries. It's kind of interesting. Like, I hope that stuff doesn't die. And I'm like, this is something I think we wrangle with, just like in the state of like where we are today as societies. Like, where does AI like automate and replace things? I mean, it's definitely coming,
Yeah.
and it's a kind of uncomfortable conversation that many kind of avoid. But um, it's coming. But it makes me again appreciate, just like you, right? There were simpler times, and in many ways, I think we were better as a society. There's a lot of things I wish that we could kind of change. It
So,
makes me
so,
appreciate what it
so I
is.
mean, to that point, I mean, obviously we can go back and forth on that one. Like for me, like obviously growing up through it, like sure it was simpler times, but again, as I stated before or before you went on, as a pseudo introvert of sorts, like
Hmm,
I can thrive more in these times, right? So like I think I mentioned to Jamie a few weeks ago when I was talking to her, like being an introvert and trying to date or trying to find somebody is not easy at all,
it's
right?
hard.
Like having that first interaction at a bar or at a work or something like that and trying to ask somebody out like it is not simple to do versus like nowadays the fact that with online dating and different things and meeting people on social media with like like-minded similar interests, like it's a completely different world that I think it almost evens the playing field so that way people who maybe have what could be come across as a disadvantage in the fact that like they're a little more shy or a little more standoffish kind
Yeah,
of get other opportunities that 30 years ago probably didn't exist, you know what I mean?
yeah. It's a very interesting thing. Um, when you think of, and I completely related to you too, Jeff. Like, as someone who I think for a long time was introverted. Again, I think if people asked me, they probably would say, "Danny, you're not introverted, and you don't shut up."
That's what I
Those
get,
are like,
right?
but like it's one of those things. I'm like, I kind of came into. I think a lot of it's kind of just inspired and driven by confidence in the people I know and the people that I've met, or people that believe in me or cheer on me. Like, it's even if it's like false confidence, like
Sure.
it makes you feel better.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's an important thing too to recognize, is like, when you feel like you have purpose based on the network you have, the people you surround yourself by, your family, like that goes a long way. I mean, we're in a mental health kind of epidemic.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I consider myself fortunate. I'm so grateful for what I have. And I really try to take inventory of that. But it reminds myself too, I'm like, I tell myself these things, and I've kind of conditioned myself to believe certain things that kind of give me this confidence. And so I remember, like, when I first started getting involved in industry, I used to go to stuff by myself,
Yeah.
and I still do. Like, I get to travel kind of for work, and for different things I do. And I'm always one to say yes, but I wasn't always comfortable doing that. I'd
Right.
show up to an event where you have none of your teammates, you don't know anyone,
Right.
right? You're one of the younger people. I was doing this, 5 or 6 years ago, so I wasn't as well connected. It's intimidating, but I think there was some kind of instilled false sense of confidence that I think was actually pretty critical early on, that helped me kind of build credibility in and just belief in myself, which I think was more important. I mean, if you don't believe in yourself, you can't expect anyone else to,
It's
right? I
true.
mean, you have to be good to yourself first before you can expect anyone else to.
Yeah,
Um,
I completely agree. What I'll say is this: like, I think I have a similar, almost evolution of sorts. So, like, I've always been kind of like the quiet guy that kind of was like in the group, right? Like, I had a friend group, but I was always the quiet guy. I think what happened to me is, so I'm 26 years into corporate America at this point. So I think
Hmm.
over the years, I kind of recognized or evolved along the lines of just recognizing that, like, I think corporate America has definitely changed over the years. But like 20 years ago, if you were the introvert, quiet person, like, you were not getting promoted, like, you were not moving ahead. Like,
Hmm.
I've worked for enough companies, I'm not going to name them, that have like a very like, hey, everyone has to go out drinking and hang out, old school sales mentality.
Yeah,
Otherwise, what's wrong with that person? Like, why aren't they? Whatever. So eventually, you start to pick up traits or practice, or it's kind of like masking of sorts to kind of have a almost like a pseudo or second persona to kind of get there. And then I've kind of figured out ways to kind of turn it on when needed, but it's exhausting because, like, for me,
oh,
like,
yeah.
I can kind of put that out there, but at the same time, like, I'm not truly wired that way. So then after having that full day of meetings, whatever else like that, I'll just come home and collapse. So it's kind of a case of, I mean, maybe you truly
Me too.
are an extrovert and you just needed to kind of like get the confidence to get that in front of you. But I think sometimes it's a case of, like, again, for me, I think it's largely masking the fact that, like, I am probably more introvertish. I'm probably at this point more of a hybrid, I guess, of sorts. But, like, again, trying to change the way you're wired and the way you feel is like a whole other level of like trying to get there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think I almost felt forced to, just by nature of like what I was doing, and I'm like, I got to a point where like I
Yeah.
couldn't learn anymore from what I was doing or the people that I was working with,
Yep.
and so that almost kind of like forced a change in me, right? Is like and I consider myself a hybrid too. Again, I chuckle at I've been at a lot of conferences even just in the last month.
Yep.
That I'm so proud to be involved in. I've got a lot of friends now at this point that go to these. But I'm like, after the first 2 days, I'm like, I want to go home.
Yes.
I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't want to describe my job anymore.
Right.
My voice is sore because I'm screaming and in nightclubs or at bars, and like there's a lot of people. It's like it's crazy. It's
Yep.
very cool, and I love to reflect on it. And I don't regret anything.
Yep.
It's also like I have a social battery, and I have to remind myself, I'm like, it's okay to say no to things. It's okay to go home early. It's also okay to stay up till 4 a.m., which I did maybe a couple of weeks ago. Can't confirm nor deny.
Didn't happen. Maybe.
Um,
Yep.
but
Gotcha.
I'm like, and sometimes I have to do that to prove to myself I can still do it.
Yep.
But it's like it was kind of just one of those things. I'm like, um, it's just like you do it, but there's a time to be an introvert and an extrovert, and
Yep.
so you kind of condition yourself. Like it's a superpower for me, right? But
Yep.
it's also like I'm conscious enough because earlier on, like I used to bite off more than I could chew. I'd be exhausted, and like you can only do so many things without kind of putting 50% into everything.
Of course.
If you're spread across 6 things, you can only dedicate so much time and effort.
So true.
So that's kind of like one of those things. So I completely relate to that too, Jeff. And I
Yeah.
think that there needs to be more conversation and less stigma around this kind of hybridized, like introvert, extrovert. Like there's advantages to both. And I think having both of us been self-disclosed or proclaimed introverts that can kind of turn it on,
Yep.
I think that's advantageous. I don't think enough people talk about that or give that credit or enough credit.
I agree. I mean, I think this is probably a part of, like, for me, like, so when I first graduated college and I was working in the real world, like, I had two different personalities. I had like my work Jeff and I had my home Jeff. I think over the years, I mean,
I'd
it's
say.
just kind of the way that it works, right? Because you look at it like, you came straight out of college, you have to kind of play a character for work because who you truly are may or may not be, your authentic self doesn't necessarily work there. Again, 26 years into my corporate career at this point, I think I just have Jeff. Like, I think I've become both. Like, at this point in my career, like, everyone at work knows that I'm a huge professional wrestling fan. They know lots of things about me that, like, years ago, you may or may not have exposed at work because you were afraid that may be held against you, kind of a deal, right? So,
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
for me, that's kind of what has worked for me. And I guess this is where we are today. Question I had for you. So, again, different decades, and I get that or whatever. You do a lot of work in terms of personal branding, having your own website and stuff like that. What are
Yeah.
your earliest memories of, I guess, your first website? Like, for me, for example, when I was in college, I was able to use, again, like eden.rutgers.edu. So, like, using HTML, I was able to kind of create a pseudo website of sorts. Then eventually, after I graduated college, then I used like GeoCities and AngelFire and various like free like hosting services.
Mhm.
And then eventually I paid for a service, which I think I'm on like GoDaddy right now or something. And along the lines, I bought the domain of jeffseltzer.com, as well as all the domains for my family. So my wife, my kids, teamseltzer.com. And then eventually, found ways to kind of like create websites without having to know HTML with like templated sites and servers and stuff like that. You obviously being born in 1995, probably, I guess, grew up through a lot of the HTML. And I would imagine your earliest memories probably were in something more templated, or did you actually start off with like actually having to code?
Yeah, I kind of skipped the whole coding phase. I completely, lacked the appreciation for this because I think it must have been MySpace because like I remember
Yeah.
a lot of people kind of recount this as like, oh, well, we were the earliest form of like coders because like you used HTML to design. I guess it was MySpace again. Like I didn't have experience with it, so I didn't.
Sure.
Facebook wasn't like that. So that was kind of my like, oh, like am I missing out on something? But and now in today's world of AI, I have a professional site, a portfolio site, a suite of personal brands that I run, and all of it's on Squarespace, which I think is also really cool. It's just even from when I graduated college, I tried something with like Wix and like some of the earlier like blog style websites, which have evolved so much, even just since 2017, 2016. So that's what I kind of use is like it is templated, but like there's also widgets and stuff you can do with custom HTML on more premium plans. You can do CSS, JavaScript. So some of these are more advanced kind of programming languages. And now in the world of AI, as someone who has to write Python, which is another programming language in my job, or self-taught, I don't have to write code anymore. Like I remember going to ChatGPT. I'm like, I want this design with this edge and this, and this color. Write me all the CSS and HTML that I need to drop it into a custom thing. And it does it like that. I'm like, I don't have to. I know enough because I write in Python, so I know how to follow like sequence and variables and like things that like a coder knows how to do, without having to know the actual variables. Right? I can throw it back into ChatGPT. It'll troubleshoot it. And there's only actually a couple custom HTML widgets I use on my website. The rest of it is just templated, right? And I had so much fun kind of designing my website because it utilizes a lot of generative AI, and a lot of just my own branding, a lot of stuff that I know Canva is the big popular tool a lot of people use, but I did a lot of stuff in PowerPoint. I'm a lifelong like PowerPoint user. I'm like, this is a skill. I use it every day,
Right.
and it came out great. And I'm like, I was able to customize everything, and then as you can appreciate too, Jeff, right? I'm like, it's just a great way to build skills and to kind of capture everything that you do. Like I could have a website for some of my other kind of side hustles and interests, but I think at least for my career early on, it's a seed that I like tactically planted because I know, all right, when people search or discover me or whatever I work on, I want it to live somewhere. I
Yes.
never had like a go-to thing I could point to. I'm sure at some point I'll develop it for my jet ski or for any of my my Yeti. I'm not a crazy Yeti person. I have probably more than I should, like 7 or 8, but I'm like it's nothing compared to the larger like Yeti cooler Tumblr community.
Sure.
I don't know, like people are crazy, but like that's I think another like I'd like to use what I've learned in my professional life in like an interest in just doing this.
Yeah.
Right, something like what you have, right? That's something that really just that's like one of my buddies from college. We were really into movies. We're really into horror. I've
Yep.
always kind of been a fan of the horror franchise,
Nice.
and genre. And I love the kind of the Alien series, Halloween. I like scary stuff. I'm also one of the worst. Like I like jump scares work on me. Like even like bad movies with jump scares, like that just it works.
Yeah.
The Conjuring, I think, is probably one of the most scary like movies that I've seen.
Have you seen the new Final Destination movie yet?
I haven't. I started to see reviews. I guess it's out because
It's very good. So I saw it last week, and this will post probably a few weeks after now, whatever. So
Yeah.
it'll be dated, but I saw opening weekend. It was fantastic. So
Really?
over the last year or so, my older daughter and I binged the first 5 Final Destination movies, not having any idea a new movie was coming out. So we watched part 1 together. I'd seen them when I was younger, and this was her first time. She's 17. So we saw the first one together. She loved it. Second one was pretty good. Third and fourth are, they're there. They exist.
Just to stretch it.
But then the 5th one was much better than it ever should have been. I know the movie's like 14 years old, so I don't want to give spoilers still. But like the ending of the 5th Final Station movie was probably one of the biggest surprises. Like I'd say up there with The Sixth Sense in terms of, for me, like, holy wow, that's amazing. You don't see it coming because again, the fifth movie of a weird horror franchise shouldn't be that good, right? Like
No.
it just doesn't. But then for me, like I think I saw something in theaters back in February, and I saw a trailer for the new one, and I was like, "There's a new one coming out." I was just blown away. So came out, recently. I saw it opening weekend, and it's potentially the best, if not the second best movie in the series. It's fantastic.
I love this kind of resurgence of like, and so
Yes.
I remember my first reaction to this trailer too.
Yeah.
I was like, whatever, where they're at, like the opening is when they're in the, the barbecue or like the backyard
Oh,
scene.
with the family. Yes. Yeah.
And I remember I'm like immediately they start to hint or kind of, like hint that like something ominous about to happen. I'm like, it sounds like, the 18th entry. It's just like the kind of Mission Impossible, the Tom Cruise movies.
Yeah.
But, and gosh, I haven't seen Final Destination, any of them in such a long time. But I remember, like, this is what struck fear in like our generation is like, like this was like the I don't even have a good thing to compare it to, but it was like this is what kind of scarred us. We were afraid of everything because it basically showed us how if we cheat death unknowingly,
Yeah.
this is how it can come back to get us. And it's kind of like the TV series, 1,000 Ways to Die, 100
Yeah.
Ways
Yeah. I
to Die,
remember that.
whatever it was called.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing the trailer and I was like, oh, this actually looks really good. I'm trying to think of where else. That's like I don't know if you've seen the Top Gun Maverick sequel to Top
Yeah.
Gun.
The new one. I've seen that. Yes.
And a lot of them said like that was better. And like I've watched them both. I mean, the first one I think has a lot more nostalgia
Sure.
to it, just because it was a first of its kind type of thing. But I kind of agree with them. They also had better technology. I think for whatever it was 2 years ago that they did Maverick, and
Right.
like a rare instance where the sequel was better. I was just talking to my boss too about. I just saw The Accountant too.
How was that?
It was very good.
Nice.
I like Ben Affleck, John Bernthal, who plays his brother from the first series. So it's a
Punisher.
sequel.
Yep. Yeah.
And I remember thinking, I'm like, they took it kind of in an entirely different direction than the first one,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's really good. It's some people would categorize this as a cheesy like shooter, but I'm like, I love this stuff, and it was actually really good. The story was interesting. It's a funny movie,
Nice.
and I'm like, it's like, oh, and I know it kind of deviates from horror, but
No,
it's like
it's
one
fun.
of
And
those,
movies as a whole. I mean, it's an
yeah,
escape. Like I know you
you
talked
never
about
expect
before about like
something to
doing
be
things
good.
by yourself. Like I go to the movies by myself. Like I just love movies. So I could talk movies all day.
Yeah, that's awesome. I started doing that too. I think I literally saw that on social media. I was like there were these people that would do like, hey, here's some things you can do as a young adult, and like
Yeah.
if you do it by yourself, literally no one cares.
Yeah.
Like you can go do whatever you want. And that's like I forget what I saw. There's this girl who went to go see Noah Khan.
Okay.
And I think like I forget the larger context of the video, but she was like, yeah, like none of my friends want to go with me. The tickets were so expensive. But I went by myself because like I really wanted to go.
Yeah.
And I'm like good for you. Like I feel like I've seen other instances of that, and I've gone to the movies by myself too. It's actually like it's a very underrated thing. I'm like, there's a movie theater in Bridgewater, not far from me,
Yep.
and
The dine-in theater is pretty nice. Actually, they have food and
yeah,
such. Just have alcohol. It's great.
yeah. It's just it's a I'm like it's a nice way to kind of unplug. Like if I have an afternoon or I don't know, I'm looking to kill an hour and I don't want to play Call of Duty or whatever else I have going on, or there's something I wanted to see.
Of course.
That's like Alien Romulus. Again, big fan of the Alien franchise.
Sure. Sure.
Sigourney Weaver's kind of a legend in that space. Bill Paxton, a lot of famous people
Yeah.
in that series. Um,
Yeah. For me, I find so I have the for AMC, I have that A-list deal where it's like $25 a
oh
month.
yeah,
I can see now they upped it to like 16 movies a month. So I
pretty
look at
good.
it, I'm like, if I see 2 movies a month, I'm already ahead of the game. Especially, where we work, where they offer summer Fridays. I'm like, my wife's working, my kids are at school. So like most summers, I'll probably see, I don't know, a dozen movies throughout the summer just by myself, just because A, I can, no one else is around, and B, it costs me absolutely nothing incrementally to watch it. So I'm like, sure, why not?
No, that's the way to go. I will probably be. I think we've talked about this. Where my family's fortunate enough, we go down the Jersey Shore, so
Nice.
our summer vacation is typically from May to September or maybe even early October.
Yeah.
So otherwise, it's actually a great. I mean, it kind of irks me sometimes because it's like I want to like I like technology and I like to not detach, but when I go down the shore, I'm like I have no choice but to detach.
It's
And I'm like, and it's a healthy balance. I'm
helpful.
much
Yeah.
less involved in industry. Like I dial back a lot of the stuff that I do. It's like it's just a good reminder to like touch grass or to touch the salt water,
Sure.
right? Or like it's good to have balance. I think that's one of the things I really found in the last few years is that like everything that I've done has just led to better like overall like life outcomes. I'm like I mean like no one teaches you how to do this. Like no one tells you this in college. I have a lot more mentors today than I used to when I first started. But like some of the stuff I've just learned on my own is like you know what's important. You know what gives you purpose in life.
Yeah,
And I'm like part of and your career is a big part of what you do.
right.
And you can appreciate this more than I can.
Yeah,
So I like to try to use all the hard work that's gone into one area of my life into others. And for me, that's usually lounging on the beach or again, I'm an amateur jet skier.
nice.
I don't do anything competitively, but if I could become a content creator in that niche and do that professionally, that'd be the dream. So I'm like, I'll continue to dream. And like, there's people that make content. You can make content in anything. And like, as
Yes.
someone who literally is a professional in the space, I see it firsthand. It's really just a cool kind of thing. But I'm always grounded in the fact that like, family first, like that's always the number one most important thing. Because at the end of the day, you'll always have them, and like that's really the higher purpose. And we talk about this at work, right? It's like higher order needs and all this stuff. Well,
Yep.
there's stuff that goes beyond like higher order needs in a company, right? It's like it's higher order of life. So despite all the kind of cool things and interests, it all kind of comes back to work life balance. But that's another thing like I've grown to appreciate, and I think you do too, Jeff. Especially as a father too.
Yeah.
Like I think you kind of have a deep appreciation. I'll have kids one day, and like probably have a lot of the same complaints and be tied to a couch and appreciate the quiet days. But like right now, I mean, I'm like, life is still interesting.
Yeah.
I like to try to, and again, there's no roadmap for like how to do this, but I'm trying to milk everything I can out of it, at least while I can.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, the key is again, we're all wired differently, and we all find our happy place in different places, right? Like for you, it sounds like obviously down the shore with your family, hanging out with them, like that's that you thrive in that, and that makes you happy. I mean, obviously, as you said, like there's no real like playbook in terms of like how to find happiness, because every generation it changes, right? Like the way that the environment looks today did not look 10, 20, 30, or 40 years ago. And again, even like what your personal situation looks like, right? Like for me, married, I have two kids in high school, based on the point in life that I'm at or whatever, there are certain things that I'm looking for or need or want. What I
Yeah.
always say to people too is like, again, we all need different things, but for me, I always need me time, us time, and family time. So the three things that I need to kind of like get me to the next level or kind of like keep me happy is I need time to myself, so me time, whether it be playing video games, whether it be going to the movies by myself, or just kind of
Huge,
sitting around and whatever. I
huge.
need us time, meaning me and my wife, to kind of just the two of us as a couple, kind of like either go on a date or kind of like hang out, watch a TV show together, and then family time. So like the four of us, so me and my wife, my two daughters, just hanging out. If it's just going out to dinner, going to see a movie together. I mean, our happy place is Disney World. We go there 3, 4 times a year.
Oh, that's
We have a timeshare down there, which definitely helps. So it's not as expensive as
awesome.
it sounds like it should be.
Yeah.
So when we stay at a hotel down there, it costs us nothing. We get like a 2 bedroom suite. It's a beautiful thing.
Nice.
Definitely feel spoiled that when we go on vacation now, we can't all share a room because it just feels too tight. And I also have flashbacks to when I was growing up, and it was me, my parents, me and my sister, me, my parents, and my sister all sharing a room in a hotel, and just like nothing about that was fun.
Oh my
So
God. I know that
it
was
was
like
it was not pleasant. So a lot of it is like looking back to my childhood, learning from my parents and my situation from back then to say, okay, how did I feel and how do I make it better for my kids and for my
yeah.
family situation? So um,
Awesome.
that's works for me. I mean, we all work in different ways. So uh, yeah, I mean that's great. And to your point, the work life balance thing as well. Like I've worked for 7 companies since college. Some companies it's work work work, and some of them are a little of each. Like I'd say where I'm currently sitting right now is probably my best case scenario in the fact that like I do have the flexibility to do what I need to and want to. I get
Mhm.
my work done, but at the same time, like I'm not working 24/7, which is optimal at this point because at 47, I'm not looking to work 70 hours a week. So
Yeah. And I think it's interesting in meeting so many different folks too, Jeff, right? I'm like, especially like having a family, it changes almost the trajectory and ambition.
yeah,
And I know I've talked to my boss about this too, who also just, had a kid a few years ago. And like I remember, I'm like I'm at a stage where like I feel like I can kind of conquer the world. I feel like at some point everyone kind of has this ambition or feeling. But
sure,
like at some point I'll want to stop, like because at some point, at least in traditional corporate America, um, to progress higher, right, you have to sacrifice significantly more. This is a very harsh reality. I think I've kind of learned from executives that I've met is that like they give up a lot.
Right.
And I'm like, and they end up making a lot of money doing so. But at what cost, right?
Of
And like
course.
some people place a much greater value on family time and themselves and you can still have a very, very successful career and a well-paying job. But what I think really excites me, Jeff, and I tell a lot of my friends this, I tell other experts, I talk to this. There's more ways to make money now than ever before. And so like I know when people joke about their kids, it's like, oh, I want to be an influencer, blah blah. I'm like, it's not, I chuckle, but I'm like, as a professional, I'm like, that's not a bad idea. Because if you can find something you're really passionate about that you can own that won't feel like work every day, I can't think of a greater goal or aspiration, right? Where you're working for yourself, producing stuff that you love, talking about stuff you love, connecting with other people you love who are also on the same journey, right? We're on a kind of crash course into what's really going to be the gig economy in the next 10 years. And there's just, I think, so many opportunities for today's youth that are all digital natives, that are all highly literate in like how to use technologies that even you and I don't know how to use.
Of course.
It's going to help them build. I mean, you can build a business using generative AI. I mean, I've kind of done it too. And I'm like, if I can do it, I can't even imagine what kind of the next generation can do, and what the tools they'll have. So that's what I kind of love about, and I try to kind of level myself off is that like the ambition shouldn't always be to make the most money or to have the highest title or position.
Yep.
Because I actually think the people that are most happy in life and the most successful are a kind of different breed, a new breed of professional, and there's an entirely new kind of career path that exists where I mean like there's creators that make more money than any executive in corporate America, right? And I'm like that's not by accident,
Yeah.
because we're in the attention economy and people will basically you only get so many impressions and attention in a day.
Of course.
So like if you carry that, it's just like Mr. Beast, who's the ultimate example. But you could do a whole case study on the really really smart things he's done. But he's basically, and we kind of talked about this, right? He's built a lot of passive income in a way
Yeah.
he's got 15 different channels. He transcribes them into different languages. He's making millions of dollars off of content that people will just go search on his platform for 5 years ago,
Right.
and it becomes cash flow. And I'm like, again, it's the ultimate example. But I've met people with 40,000 followers, 30,000 followers. They'd make $500,000 a year. They do this for a living, and then like I feel like I got lucky to even meet these people to know
Yeah.
that that's a thing,
Right.
and that's what gives me hope, not only for myself but like for people and hopefully my kids. Is that like if in 20 years the best path forward for you may not be going to college, right? Or I don't want to I think the trades are also still a phenomenal path forward for a lot of people. I know a lot of people in the trades, they'll go on to make more than us, right? Because people don't want to do that type of work. It's a fascinating thing when you think about, again, like raising kids and like your future. And I'm like, I can do some basic electrical and like plumbing work, but like I'll never have a career out of this. And I'm
Sure.
like, there's so many people that will, and they can charge whatever they want. It's
Right.
very similar in the digital space, right? If you can own a niche and do whatever and be the best at whatever you do, or one of the best, you can charge whatever you want. You can build your own business around this, and you can make a living. It's an entirely different thing. This didn't exist before the internet. Didn't exist before social monetization. Some of the
Yeah.
other kind of like more intricate things in the social world, but that's I think what's so exciting. And that's what I think. Like I don't know what your kids' aspirations are, but I would never shoot them down if they told me that like they want to be a creator. There's never been a wider open kind of playing field for people to be successful in this type of field.
So a number of things there. So first of all, thank you for sharing. So I would say I agree with you to a certain extent that like, hey, kids have obviously this opportunity to be a social influencer and a creator. I would say the key is though, especially at this point, like my daughter's from high school, so just walking you through kind of my experience right now. Like if that's what they want to do, that's great, but that needs to be kind of like part of okay, also go to college and
Yes,
also get the degree, right? Because I've seen of
very
people who
much
are like, oh, I just want to go play video games and esports and make money off of that. That's great, but either A, if that
so. Okay,
technology goes
Bill.
away, you're done, or B, if you're not that good, you're kind of screwed at that point. So which I think that's the case. Secondly, I would say, as you were saying, with like all the opportunities with online and .com and stuff like that. I mean, I think that one of the biggest things that I've been able to pick up over the number of years because of this technology advancement is just online investing, right? So like 30 years ago,
Yeah.
1980s, 1990s, if you wanted to buy stock or buy a mutual fund or buy anything, you had to call a broker, right? You have to call and say, hey, I want to buy 30 shares of AT&T or whatever it is, right? You didn't have any up-to-date pricing. The only way you get the pricing is every morning in the newspaper, it would say what the stock closed out the day before.
Sure.
So versus like nowadays, I mean, I don't know what your situation is like. I log into Fidelity. It gives me real-time stuff. I can buy and sell as I want to. There is no transaction fee. Like years ago, you would pay anywhere between $40 and $100 per stock trade, right? So looking at that, like in order to actually make any kind of money in stocks, you had to make, a huge amount of growth and a lot of dividends because that transaction fee will just kill you otherwise. So like the fact that you can do that and the fact that like for me, I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years educating my daughter is largely in personal finance. I have a huge passion for personal finance and the fact that like growing up, I didn't really get the education, and even like coming out of college, like I didn't necessarily know how to do it. Eventually, I got laid off from a company I was at, and I got a nice lump sum of money, and I was like, okay, I want to make sure this is my nest egg, and I don't blow it. So got the money, started doing research, reading, watching more CNBC, stuff like that, and figuring out the best way to do it. I've made mistakes along the way, but like learning things. And then over the years, I've set up both my daughters with each have their own brokerage account. They both at 17 and 15, each have their own Roth IRA. So things like that. So that way, like, they're set up hopefully for life. Because I get that they come from privilege and at this point I have privilege. So I want to make sure it's not wasted, make sure that like they use it and that they can benefit from it. Additionally, like just knowing the knowledge that I have, dozens of people at work and many of my friends, I've taken them through like my own personal finance, like 101 seminar. I've created models to kind of get a sense of where you are today, where you want to get to, and kind of like what it looks like year by year to get to that certain point. If they want to retire or where they think they're going to be. So again, these are things that like 30 years ago, like I couldn't have done, right? Like I'm using basic Excel for my modeling. I'm using Fidelity Online for my investing, which again, if like you talked to Jeff Seltzer in 1995, he would have looked at you and said, what's an Excel and what's a Fidelity? I don't know. So it's just things like that. And again, like hoping that like, my kids pick up what I'm teaching them and showing to them and hoping that years from now, like they continue to advance based off of that. And that when newer versions of whatever, pop up, that they advance with it or we can advance together. So that way, we are all in a better financial place. You know what I mean?
That's so smart. And I kind of share similar, I think kind of interest in personal finance. It's one of those things. Like I remember, I'm very fortunate. My parents are pretty financially literate. They're, I'm not a first generation college student. So like I also come from a position of privilege, right? I'm like, and I recognize that too as someone who's, mentored folks that are, from marginalized communities, underserved communities, and from first generation college families. So it's given me like I almost had to do that to kind of appreciate that. Like, first of all, many of these people work significantly harder than I ever could.
Yeah, to that point, if I could mention, so I've worked pretty much every day since I was like 15. So like in high school, I worked at Burger King, I worked at a Sizzler. In college, I worked at various places. And like for me, I would say like when I worked in a CVS in college, like at one point I was working 70 hours a week between Sam Goody and CVS. I would work the daytime shift at the morning shift at CVS, the night shift at Sam Goody, and then the overnight shift at CVS unloading trucks, all for $5 an hour, because that was the minimum wage back in the 90s. And again, in honesty, I didn't necessarily need the money, but it was a case of like I wasn't getting allowance at home. And if I wanted to do fun stuff, I had to do this. So to the point I was going to make before from what you said, like I feel like, and again, I hope my boss and people that I work with aren't really listening. Like, earmuffs if you're listening right now. Like I worked significantly harder in college when I was at a job than I do today. Like the physicality of unloading trucks at 3:30 in the morning at Menlo Park Mall in Edison. It was breathtaking. And the fact that it was like 90 degrees, middle of the summer, all that kind of stuff, right? And then getting home, trying to sleep, in the morning before I went back to work again. So there was that. So it was a case of I'm in a place of privilege right now, so I'm thankful. But I also have empathy because I work with so many people that, like, for me, I was in college at the time, so I recognize that for me, like, this was a short-term, gig, right? Eventually, I graduate college and I'd find something, more office-like. But I was working with people in the late '90s when I was in college who, like, this was their life. And knowing, in 2025, if they're still working, they're probably still working in a similar kind of a job. So for me, I have empathy towards that. I'm thankful for the place in life that I'm at. Sure, there's some hard work that I had. There's some luck. There's a combination of everything. But that's also why, like, for me, I look at it and I'm like, I don't want to mess up what I currently have, and I want to make the most of it. And again, make sure my kids have every advantage they can have, so that way they don't have to go through what I did.
I think that's awesome, Jeff. You know, it's one of those things that I feel like I hope I'll appreciate too when I have kids in my own family. Is that and I didn't work nearly as hard as you have. I mean I had a summer job. You know, I was fortunate that again I was looking back now, like I was given a lot of things. I had to earn a lot of what I had, but like I was, I definitely came from a position of privilege too. I'm still in a position of privilege. And like I remember the same kind of thing. Actually, I forget if I told you this. I worked at the Turtleback Zoo.
Okay.
Um, there's a like a ropes course, like an aerial adventure course.
Yes.
And I was one of the guides on it for several seasons. That was freshman and sophomore year of college, I think. That was like when I came home.
I probably saw you then too, because my kids. So at that point, when did you graduate college? You graduated like 2017 or so.
2017. Yeah.
Yeah. So my daughters were born in '07 and 10. So I guarantee you that I was going to Turtleback Zoo with my kids around that time.
That's awesome. So I grew up on Walker Road, which is right around the corner,
Okay.
right off of Northfield. So I mean, Turtleback Zoo is kind of iconic in New Jersey, but it was even more iconic, I think, to me, who grew up. I could hear the train that ran around in the zoo every day, every day that it was open, and so that was a very kind of personal thing for me. And I remember my mom telling me, Dan, I feel like you would like this because we did like Project Adventure in high school, and I was like, I don't know, it could be a cool thing. It's probably still looking back. I don't know. I'd like to think I've had some cool jobs, but that might be the coolest job I've had. And the same type of thing, Jeff, is like a lot of people I worked with there, and like we were making minimum wage or slightly
Sure.
above that. It was just a college job, but like a couple of folks on the staff were teachers, right? And like they had to work a summer job,
Yep.
or there were folks that even years later, I would go on to, to have a salary position, and a lot of these people were still working here. But I'm like, I remember like I mean, try wearing a helmet and a harness in 90-degree heat and like trying to save these people who don't know how to do this, this course at 40 feet in the air.
Right.
God forbid.
Yep.
And, but like, I remember I'm like, I had so much fun. It was just a very, very cool job. And, I knew at that point, or at least my parents would tell me, as fun as you're having, Dan, like at some point you will probably go into a job that's less interesting,
Yes.
that will make you more money,
Hmm.
right? And like, like this isn't like some of your ambition, even as cool as it is. And like looking back now, I'm like, I still wish some days, um, that I could have a cool job. Again, I like to think I have a cool job now. I used to work at the Treasury Department next to the White House. I mean, like I've really had some interesting jobs.
So, Danny, to that point, what I'll say is this. So, I mean, obviously, corporate America is what it is, right? Obviously,
Yeah,
there's limitations, there's things that you have to do, whatever else like that. In terms of cool jobs, though, I mean, obviously, you work in social listening, which is something that's different and probably interesting. But
yeah,
what I was going to say, though, too, is that's where kind of like these side hobbies or gigs kind of come in, right? So, like for me, I work in corporate America, right? That's what pays the bills. I do fairly well doing that. But then I have a podcast. Like, this is where I have my fun. Right.
yeah,
This is something where like there's obviously less limitations. I own it to the point we made before about like personal branding. Like I can brand this however I want. I
yeah.
can say things. I don't have to go through legal if I want to do something like different things like that. I mean, I'm sure you experience similar things. So it's a case of I kind of look at it like, okay, we work because we have to, but then that funds everything else that we want to do. And that's kind of like where the fun kind of comes. And again, obviously work isn't always just all work. There is some fun at work. And I fully acknowledge that. And again, we're not, we're not in the mines. We're not, building train tracks, stuff like that. And I fully get that as well. But at the same time, like corporate America is not nearly as fun as like the podcast or as like for
Oh,
you, some of your side hustles, stuff like that. So the key is life is what you make of it,
I think so much of that too. And I think it almost, and you probably feel the same way, Jeff, is like it was an itch. Like for a long time, well, some of this was also just born out of the nature of my job, and I saw other
Sure.
people doing it. But it was also like, oh, like there's a great way. I like playing Call of Duty. I've been playing Call of Duty since the first Black Ops,
Nice.
and like that was just kind of my thing. Even I don't have as much time to play as I used to, but I mean, I'll probably play after this. And it's like. Like it's a way to like detach and like it's like it's the last kind of piece of my childhood where it was like you had time to waste when you had more time.
Right.
That's what I did. Like you play with it and like it's a game, and I'm like it's a great way to kind of detach. I know I have other hobbies now too, but like I remember thinking I'm like that's just a great way to kind of unwind. But I think the personal branding stuff. Really was just born out of passion and an itch, right? That was like, I wanted to try to create content. I found I'm a good public speaker. Um, People were somewhat interested in what I had to say. I feel the same way about other people that I love to follow and interact with. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, why don't I produce content around this? Like, why am I waiting for other people to invite me? I'll just make it myself. I can do all the branding.
Right.
I've learned a thing or two being part of a marketing team. I've taken one marketing class my whole life. Everything else I've learned by doing. And it's like it became a fun thing. It was a project, and kind of like to what we said, you're more willing to put more time and passion and energy and commitment into something that you build for yourself. That's entrepreneurialism or entrepreneurialism in a big company. And I've always believed that I've had a lot of these skills. I see it in so many of the people we work with. And I remember thinking, I'm like, oh, what if I use every one of these skills, everything I've learned to build something for myself, right? The people have associations or label me as certain things. I label myself as certain things. Why don't I like build that up into something? It doesn't have to be all at once, but I've got enough content that like if I plant it now as a seed, I'm always playing a long game.
Sure.
And like so like that's kind of what it is. I'm like, in the future, I want people to think of me and remember me for this. I also want them to remember me for the memes and the gifs and all the other kind of fun and silly stuff that I do, but also like the friendships and really the other people that I've given a platform,
Yep.
recognizing again, I kind of come from a position of privilege and I have a platform. Um, but I want to be remembered for, and like that's legacy. You talk about purpose too, right? It's like
Right.
I can turn my passion and stuff that just comes naturally to me and that I love doing and to create value and equity and wealth for other people. This is actually something I get from Jeff Bezos, your fellow Jeff. Um, is that he did an interview? I guess it was the New York Times. He said this before. Is that like I wish like history would remember me as as inventor Jeff Bezos, right? Or entrepreneur Jeff Bezos. He has a much more eloquent way of kind of putting this, but basically it was like when I started Amazon. Again, kind of fascinating thing is like Amazon could have failed many times, much like many of the big companies today.
Sure.
He talks about like this kind of critical point where we had to raise enough capital back in like 97 or 98. It was really at the earliest stage. This was a fascinating interview. I'll have to send it to you if you haven't seen it.
Yeah.
And he
Go
talks
for it.
about that, like, um, basically, long story short, is like, as the founder of Amazon, I haven't just created a lot of wealth for myself, right? We've created hundreds of billions of dollars in shareholder value, right? For buyers and sellers, for small businesses. And so it was like, I want to be measured and remembered by the amount of wealth I've created for other people. And
Right.
like I remember when he said that resonated so deeply with me. And that like that's kind of the ambition I've kind of like blindly been following is that like I also want to I'm not going to be a gazillionaire like him, but like I want to create wealth for other people, recognize that I've created wealth for myself, and that like there's so many ways that like I give back quietly and publicly, but
Sure.
also it's like a little bit at a time. And I'm like, I wish as a measurement guy, I wish there was some kind of measure of that, the way that Jeff Bezos describes um, the wealth that Amazon's created for other people and investors. And he like jokes about it in the interview, but that kind of sits in the back of really actually at the front of my mind lately, is that like everything I do isn't just I mean it is for fun more first and foremost, but if there's any opportunity to create an opportunity, wealth, or just some form of benefit,
Yep.
people around me or that have supported me, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go out of my way to do it. I have an inner circle of people, and folks that I would go to the end of the earth for, beyond my family, so like that's kind of like a deeper purpose thing that I like. And I mentioned the Jeff Bezos quote because people know who he is,
Right.
but I took that very personally as someone who will likely not go on to found another Amazon, but like everyone can kind of relate to is that like we should want to create a slightly better society than the one we left in. That's about as profound as I can get, Jeff, without sounding too cringe. But
No,
that's literally what I think I believe in as a just a
no, that's pretty deep, and I think that's actually a pretty good spot for us to end for the day, as we are running a little short on time. So,
yeah,
with
yeah,
that said, Danny, I do appreciate your coming on. Thank you so much.
yeah.
Do you want to plug your socials, plug your website, things like that?
Yeah, sure. I'm the founder of Danny's Data Zone. Basically a hub for social listening, insights, market research people. Really, anyone who's a fan of social media. I kind of write and create content around a lot of different things. So you can go check me out, dannysdatazone.com. A whole bunch of stuff that I'm involved in, personal brands, content that I make. Much like Jeff, I'm also on StreamYard. I also do my own LinkedIn Live series. So if you want to learn a little bit more about me, that's my shameless plug. But otherwise, Jeff, this was so much fun to do. Ever since you started this, I've had so much respect for you as one of the other creators of work. But this was so much fun to do. Thank you so much for having and for thinking of me to let me step a little bit outside of my my day job and just basically the stuff that I talk about 24/7.
Yeah, of course. This has been so much fun. I appreciate it, and definitely want to have you on again, probably later this year at some point to get around to, because I'm sure as much as we talked about, there's so much more we could probably dig into. We never talked about social listening, so I'm sure we can get to that at some point. But with that said, Danny, thank you for joining. I do want to remind my listeners that, again, our show can be found on Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. TikTok is at Everybody Has a Story Pod as well. My personal Instagram is at Seltzer77 for all things Jeff Seltzer. You can check out our sponsors over at jeffseltzer.com. You can email the show directly at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. Make sure to tell everybody around you that we are available on all podcast platforms. We are video in Spotify and on YouTube. We are audio on those two locations and everywhere else. With that said, have an amazing time. Have an amazing week, and we will chat again soon. Thank you.